What if the girl who never walked suddenly took her first steps, not because of medicine, or money, or miracles, but because of a man everyone had already given up on? This isn't just a story about healing. It's about a veteran with nothing left to prove. A billionaire mother who forgot how to hope, and a little girl who said everything without saying a word. If stories like this move you, stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of love that chooses to stay, we invite you to subscribe. It helps us bring you more real feeling stories that stay with you, long after the screen fades. Now, let's begin. The first sound wasn't the wind, it was the shatter. A sharp crack rang through the silent veranda as the wind chime, once a delicate sculpture of porcelain and copper, split in two, its shards scattering across the marble floor. Amelia Vaughn looked up from her tablet, startled, but not surprised. The autumn wind had grown stronger lately, slicing through the city's skyline and into her private terrace, untouched by time, but not by tension. Across the patio, her daughter Lena sat still, as always, in her oversized white chair, eyes unfocused, arms limp. Her blonde curls clung to her cheeks. The 5-year-old hadn't spoken in over 2 years, hadn't walked in 3. Not since the crash, not since her world fell silent. But the wind didn't stop, and neither did the man. Amelia barely noticed him at first. Just another maintenance worker the building management had sent without her explicit approval. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded military green jacket under a beige utility apron, and had the kind of long, sun-touched brown hair that spoke more of forgotten road trips than corporate routines. His name tag, if there was one, was hidden behind a smudge of paint on his chest. What she did notice was this. He didn't flinch, didn't even look up at the luxury around him. He knelt silently, knees pressing into the cold stone, and with hands that bore years of labor and something heavier, something invisible, he began to gather the broken pieces of the wind chime. He worked gently, reverently. No glue, no tools, just his fingers, calloused but careful, aligning the pieces as if stitching back a memory. And then, without asking, without even speaking, he reached up and rehung the wind chime. It swayed softly. The wind caught it again. This time it sang, a pure, haunting chime, a sound that carried. And that's when it happened. Lena moved, just a flicker at first. Her head turned, barely an inch, but it turned. Her gaze followed the sound, her eyes landing directly on the man by the window. Amelia froze. She'd grown used to stillness, to absence. Her daughter hadn't reacted to anything in years, neither light, nor music, nor the dozen therapists she'd hired. But now, for the first time since the accident, the little girl had looked at someone. Really looked. The man didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose not to react. Either way, he gave the chime one last nudge, then turned to leave through the side gate, unnoticed except for one small voice that never spoke. Lena blinked. Once. Twice. Then slowly, painfully, she lifted her hand, just a few inches off the chair's armrest. Amelia dropped her tablet. She rushed across the terrace, kneeling beside her daughter, eyes wide with disbelief. "Lena," she whispered. But the child didn't speak, didn't smile. Her hand lowered again, yet the trace of awareness remained in her eyes like sunlight creeping through a storm cloud. The moment passed as quickly as it came. That evening, Amelia paced her penthouse like a woman chasing ghosts. She played back security footage on the terrace camera again and again, watching the man fix the chime, watching Lena react. She zoomed in on his face. There was something in his expression, not kindness, not duty, something quieter, like he was seeing something others had missed. Or maybe he just wasn't trying to fix anything. In her office, Amelia pulled up the tenant logs. No names matched his description. No background checks. No contractor IDs. He wasn't in the system. She closed the laptop, and for the first time in months, she didn't open another screen. Downstairs, Daniel Reese sat in a folding chair behind the maintenance garage. His hands still smelled faintly of oil and copper. Beside him, his son Micah, 7 years old, lean, quiet, with eyes too wise for his age, was coloring in a notebook with a stub of blue crayon. Daniel glanced down at the drawing. It was of a girl. Blonde curls, sitting by a window, a chime overhead. "You saw her?" Daniel asked softly. Micah nodded. "She looked at you." Daniel exhaled through his nose. He didn't believe in miracles. Not anymore. He believed in routines, in staying invisible, in keeping his head down long enough to not lose another job. But that look, that tiny motion, it had stirred something in him he didn't know still existed. "Don't get involved," he muttered to himself. "Too late," Micah said, not looking up. Daniel ruffled the boy's hair with a sigh. "Let's just do our job." The next morning, Amelia asked building security to locate the man from the footage. She gave a vague description, but her tone made it clear. This wasn't a casual request. By noon, she had a name. Daniel Reese, single parent, hired on temporary rotation from a facilities vendor. No complaints, no accolades. A man who left no mark. Except now, he had. At 3 p.m., she watched from the window as he entered the courtyard again, toolbox in hand. He didn't look up, just walked toward the far corner of the building where the garden lights had shorted out 2 nights prior. Lena, from her perch near the window, stared again. Amelia didn't move. She didn't speak. She only watched. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't the one who had unlocked her daughter. She wasn't the one her daughter was waiting for. And that shook her more than the silence ever had. Daniel hadn't planned to bring Micah. It wasn't ideal, lugging a 7-year-old into a corporate residential tower. But after the sitter canceled again, and Daniel saw the emptiness in his son's eyes that morning, he made a decision. The boy had missed too much school already. Too many routines broken. Too many goodbyes. Besides, he was just swapping out lighting fixtures near the garden terrace. An easy job, in and out. No one would notice, except someone did. From the second-story window, Lena Vaughn sat still in her chair, the same chair Daniel had seen her in 2 days ago when the wind chime shattered and everything changed. She didn't blink as Micah wandered into the courtyard, dragging a string behind him with a small toy airplane clipped to the end. Micah didn't notice her either. Not yet. He was in his own world, as he often was. A quiet place where logic bent, time slowed, and connections were drawn between things no one else could see. His therapist called it selective engagement. Daniel called it Micah being Micah. The boy traced slow circles around the brick path, tugging the airplane, whispering a story under his breath only he could follow. Inside, behind the window pane, Lena leaned forward, just slightly. Enough to rest her fingers against the glass. Her eyes tracked the plane's path like a cat watching a butterfly. Her lips parted. Not a sound. But something flickered. Something delicate. Like a string being plucked inside her chest. She smiled. Just once. Just barely. But it was there. Downstairs, Daniel adjusted the angle of a garden light, wiped his hands, and looked up. He froze. Lena was watching Micah, and she was smiling. It stopped him cold. He turned to find Micah now beneath the window, standing still, looking up as well. Their eyes didn't meet, but their awareness did. Micah slowly let go of the string. The toy plane came to rest beside his shoe. A moment passed. Then, with deliberate care, Micah reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. He knelt, began folding with practiced ease. 1 minute. too. Then he stood, walked to a nearby bench, climbed up, and released a paper bird into the air. It danced through the breeze and landed gently on the grass. Lena clapped, a dry, awkward, childlike clap. But it was real. Amelia saw everything. From her office balcony, she stood frozen behind the curtain, watching a stranger's son charm her daughter into life. The corners of her mouth twitched between disbelief and something dangerously close to awe. But awe was quickly swallowed by anxiety. What was happening? Who were these people? Where was the protocol? She snapped. Within 10 minutes, 2 building security officers arrived at the courtyard, radioed from Amelia's orders. One approached Daniel, while the other motioned for Micah to step back. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you and your son to vacate this area. This is a private residence," the guard said. Daniel straightened, confusion flashing across his face. "I'm on assignment. Facilities sent me to replace." "We've had a complaint," the guard cut in. Micah stood still, bird clutched in hand. Lena, from the second-floor window, watched them. Her smile vanished. Her body trembled. And then, she cried. No sound, just tears. Wet, sudden, unstoppable. The nurse stationed nearby gasped. She's crying!" Amelia rushed in from the other room, panic tightening her chest. No! Don't let her spiral!" she muttered, pressing the emergency call button. But it was already too late. Lena curled into herself, knees drawn up, small body shaking in a way that hadn't happened since the night her father died. Below, Daniel instinctively pulled Micah close, shielding him from the confusion. He didn't understand what was happening, but he felt the shift. The next hour blurred. Micah was escorted from the garden. Daniel was warned, lightly but firmly, not to return with unauthorized persons. Lena was sedated under a doctor's supervision. Amelia barked orders into her phone, demanding tighter access controls, full identity verification of all temporary staff, and a full report by morning. Later that evening, as silence returned to the estate, a nurse hesitantly approached Amelia in the hallway. "Ma'am," she said gently, "I know this isn't my place, but maybe you shouldn't stop the boy from visiting." Amelia turned, tight-lipped. The nurse swallowed. "I've worked here a year. Lena hasn't smiled, hasn't cried, hasn't looked at anyone. Until now." Another aide chimed in. "It wasn't the man. It was the boy. He spoke her language." Amelia felt the comments like thorns. She didn't respond. Instead, she walked to her study and shut the door behind her. She replayed the footage, over and over. That smile, that little clap, the bird, the crying. She'd built walls, systems, staff, procedures to protect her daughter. But maybe what Lena needed wasn't protection. Maybe it was presence. Still, she couldn't ignore the risk. What if the boy was a trigger, not a remedy? What if Daniel had manipulated his way into the assignment? What if she was losing control? Control had been her armor for so long. Taking it off now felt like standing naked in a battlefield. So she made a decision. Temporary access, under supervision. Observation only. No contact. But even as she wrote the memo, she felt it. The thread tugging at something deeper. Because somewhere inside, she couldn't stop seeing it. That smile. That paper bird. And the girl in the window, who might still be reachable. The conference room was colder than usual. Amelia Vaughn sat at the head of the long glass table, fingers steepled, jaw locked. Across from her sat Daniel Reese, his green maintenance jacket folded neatly on his lap. Next to him, Micah swung his legs under the chair, his small fingers tracing invisible lines across the table's reflective surface. The silence dragged until Amelia finally spoke. "This is not an arrangement I take lightly." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. His eyes flicked to Micah, then back to her. she continued, voice sharp. "I'm authorizing a temporary exception. You and your son will be allowed access to the courtyard during non-peak hours. No unsupervised interaction with Lena. You'll stay within visual contact of staff at all times. One infraction, and this ends." Daniel nodded once. Slow. "Fine." Micah didn't look up. Amelia turned to him, softening her tone. "You understand this isn't a game, right?" The boy glanced at her, then whispered, "She's not broken." Amelia flinched like she'd been slapped. Daniel reached for his son's hand under the table. He squeezed it gently. "That's enough." The meeting ended without further comment. The next morning, Daniel and Micah returned to the garden. Micah wore a faded navy hoodie and carried a small tin box filled with paper squares. He sat near the base of a tree, folding silently. His fingers moved with quiet precision. Lena watched from her chair behind the window, unmoving but alert. Daniel kept his distance, tools in hand, replacing bulbs along the path. But his eyes never strayed far from the children. An hour passed. Then something shifted. Lena blinked, then again, and slowly, cautiously, she moved. It was subtle, a twitch of her right foot, then her left. Barely perceptible, but unmistakably voluntary. The nurse gasped. "Amelia, she's moving!" Amelia arrived just in time to see her daughter's toes curl against the footrest. Down in the garden, Micah released a new paper crane. It fluttered upward, kissed by a breeze. Lena's foot lifted off the chair, only by an inch, but it was enough to make everyone freeze. Micah smiled, just barely, and looked straight at her. Daniel, still kneeling by the light fixture, slowly rose. His left sleeve rolled back slightly as he stood, revealing a jagged, half-healed scar running along the underside of his forearm. One of the nurses noticed. She didn't ask. She just stared. Daniel caught the glance and tugged his sleeve down. His movements were automatic. Reflex, not shame. Micah noticed too. Later, as they walked back through the service hallway, the boy looked up at his father. "Was it from the war?" Daniel didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "Some things don't heal the way they should." Micah said nothing. He just held his father's hand a little tighter. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Micah folded birds. Lena watched. She began lifting her feet more, turning her head, even laughing. Once, a sound like wind brushing over strings. It startled Amelia so deeply she dropped her phone. The therapists were baffled. The medical team ran tests, scans, neural response checks. Everything pointed to one conclusion they didn't know how to put into words. Connection was doing what medicine couldn't, but not everyone approved. During a staff meeting, tensions boiled. "She's responding, yes," said one nurse, arms crossed. "But there's no precedent for this kind of unstructured interaction. It's not therapy, it's risky." "She smiled," countered another. "That child smiled. That should mean something." Amelia stood in silence at the front of the room. She was used to charts, to measured outcomes and validated protocols. But this was something messier, unmeasurable. It terrified her. Still, she made her decision. "We continue," she said quietly. One evening, after hours, Daniel remained alone in the courtyard. Micah had been picked up early by a neighbor for a school project. Daniel, for once, was without his son. He stood by the broken path light, the one he'd been fixing all week. It didn't matter how many times he rewired it, it kept shorting out. He stared at it, then sat on the stone edge of the flower bed and let the silence settle. The moon cast pale streaks across the concrete. Then, soft footsteps. He turned. Lena. She stood at the edge of the garden path, barefoot, wearing her nightgown. She was holding one of Micah's cranes. She didn't speak, just looked at him. Daniel rose slowly, cautious not to startle her. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly. "You're not supposed to be out here." Lena tilted her head, then, carefully, placed the paper crane on the stone beside the faulty light. Daniel looked down at it, then at her. "You want me to fix this one too?" Lena nodded, barely. He smiled. "All right then." He knelt. Lena didn't move. From the balcony, Amelia watched, breath caught in her throat. Her daughter. Standing. Not just standing. Present. She didn't call out, didn't interrupt. She let the moment live. And in that silence, in the soft click of a new bulb finding its socket, something shifted, not just in Lena, but in all of them. Hope. Not loud, not sudden, but real. The paper birds had become part of the landscape now. They clung to branches like white blossoms, tucked between ivy and stone. Some landed in flower beds, others floated into the fountain where Lena liked to sit. No one told Micah to stop. No one dared. Because with every folded wing that caught the wind, Lena seemed to breathe a little deeper. Each morning, he arrived with a new handful, perfectly folded cranes, doves, sometimes even little kites. From the top-floor balcony, he dropped them one by one like silent prayers. Lena, now fully mobile in her upper body, leaned over to catch them with an excitement that, only weeks ago, would have seemed like fantasy. Micah never spoke during these drops, but he always smiled. Lena began smiling back. Daniel watched from the terrace edge, polishing the last of the rust from an old wooden pushcart he'd found discarded behind the storage shed. It was a primitive thing. 2 wheels squeaked. The handle was cracked, but he saw what it could be. He oiled the axles, reinforced the base, and rewrapped the handle in soft cloth. He didn't ask permission. He just showed up the next day with it under one arm and a screwdriver in the other. Amelia watched from her office window. She told herself it was oversight. No one had cleared this kind of activity through her. But her hand hovered over the intercom and never pressed the button. Instead, she watched. Lena's eyes lit up when she saw the cart. Her hands reached for it instinctively. Micah steadied it from behind as Daniel helped her stand and take her place inside. Her legs still trembled, still buckled under weight, but the movement, the will, was unmistakable. And then they were off. Micah pushed gently at first, guiding her along the stone path with the paper birds fluttering beside them. Daniel trailed behind, arms crossed, not quite smiling, but not far from it either. Lena's laughter filled the garden. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't polished, but it was hers. Amelia stepped back from the window. Something clenched in her chest, something sharp, something shameful. Because for the first time in years, her daughter was alive, and she wasn't part of it. She didn't know how to join it. She had spent so long managing Lena's world, controlling it, that she no longer knew how to simply enter it. She had outsourced love into protocols, replaced connection with treatment plans. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to keep Lena safe, she had made herself a stranger. She didn't cry. She just closed the blinds. That night, Daniel sat on the rooftop alone. The stars were faint above the city haze, but he could still trace Orion if he focused hard enough. In his lap was a small, sand-colored toy Jeep. Scuffed, missing a wheel, edges worn soft by time. He turned it over in his hand, fingers tracing the underside where a name had once been scratched in. Amir. A boy. 8 years old. Curious. Brilliant. Brave. He'd followed Daniel's squad through the rubble-strewn alleys of Fallujah like a shadow, showing them which roads were safe, which walls could collapse. He brought water. Smiles. Hope. Until the morning the wrong building exploded, until Daniel pulled only the Jeep from the ashes. His hand tightened around the toy now. Micah appeared beside him without a sound, holding a paper crane. "Can I put one on the stars?" the boy asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "You can try." Micah placed the crane on the rooftop ledge and blew on it. It fluttered once, lifted a few inches, then spun to rest again beside Daniel's foot. "I saw her hug me today," Micah said quietly. Daniel looked up. "She put her arm around my neck, like this." The boy mimicked it gently. I didn't move. I didn't want her to stop. Daniel swallowed hard. "She's not afraid of me," Micah added. "No," Daniel whispered. "She's not." He didn't say what he was thinking, that it wasn't just Lena who had changed. It was Micah too, and maybe even himself. The next morning, Lena sat waiting in the garden before anyone else arrived. Her fingers gripped the handle of the wooden pushcart, knuckles pale. Daniel approached with a quiet nod. She offered him a paper bird. He took it gently, tucked it into his shirt pocket without a word. Then Micah appeared, and something miraculous happened. Lena stood. No help, no hand-holding, no cart. She wobbled, one foot half a step forward, but she stood. Just long enough to take one uncertain step toward Micah. He grinned, held out both arms. She collapsed into them with a small yelp of joy. And then, she wrapped her arms around his neck. The staff gasped. The nurse dropped her clipboard. A security guard whispered something under his breath. From her balcony, Amelia pressed her hand to her chest. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a milestone therapists could chart. But it was human. And it was hers. Her daughter had reached for someone, and for once, it hadn't been out of fear. It had been love. Amelia had never felt more invisible in her own home. Every morning, she watched Lena light up at the sight of Micah's cranes. Every afternoon, she observed her daughter reaching, physically and emotionally, toward the boy and the man who arrived without permission, credentials, or understanding of how fragile Lena truly was. Worse still, no one else seemed to question it anymore. The nurses had stopped logging every foot twitch or eye blink. The therapists took quiet steps back. Even the house manager, who had once radioed her 3 times a day with updates, now simply sent a text. She smiled again. Amelia didn't want smiles. She wanted structure, predictability, control. She didn't recognize this world anymore. That Thursday morning, Daniel showed up early. Too early. He stood in the foyer in his usual worn green shirt, toolbox in one hand, paper bird in the other. Micah trailed beside him, holding Lena's refurbished pushcart like it was some kind of royal carriage. Amelia met him near the entry with clipped steps and eyes that had lost all pretense of politeness. "You were not scheduled until 11, she said. Daniel looked at her without blinking. "We came early because Micah made something for Lena. She doesn't need more toys," she snapped. "It's not a toy," Micah said quietly, stepping forward. He held up a piece of folded paper, a simple heart. On it, drawn in marker, was a stick-figure family, a tall man, a small boy, and a girl in a wheelchair smiling between them. No mother. Amelia's chest tightened. She crouched down to Micah's eye level. "Sweetheart, that's very thoughtful. But Lena has a mother." Micah tilted his head. "I know." He didn't explain. He didn't have to. The message had already landed. Amelia stood, too quickly, her composure cracking. "You're overstepping," she said, this time to Daniel. "Whatever this is, this routine you've fallen into, it's temporary. Lena is my daughter." Daniel's expression remained calm, but there was steel in his voice now. "Then be present for her." Amelia's breath hitched. "Excuse me." "She doesn't need saving," he said. "She needs someone who stays. She needs presence, not perfection." "She needs her mother," Amelia hissed. He nodded. "Then show her." 10 minutes later, Amelia locked herself in the downstairs bathroom. She turned on the faucet just to drown out her own thoughts. then stared into the mirror above the marble sink. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion. She no longer tried to cover with concealer. Her reflection felt like a stranger in designer clothes. She touched the glass, then whispered, "Am I still her mother?" The question didn't echo. It just hung there, silent and awful. That afternoon, the clouds gathered low. Daniel sat with Micah near the maintenance shed. Lena was napping. The garden was still. Micah leaned against his father's side. "Did you ever have to hurt anyone?" Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't answer right away either. Then he said, "Once I couldn't." Micah looked up. "What do you mean?" Daniel stared at his hands. "There was a boy, not much older than you. He had something strapped to his chest. I was supposed to pull the trigger. My hands, they froze. I couldn't breathe. I passed out." Micah's eyes widened. "You fainted?" "I failed," Daniel said. There was no drama in his tone, no embellishment, just the cold, flat truth of a memory that still haunted him. "The rest of the unit handled it," he continued. "No one died. But I was discharged. They called it stress response failure. I called it clarity." Micah didn't speak. He just reached out and held Daniel's hand. Amelia, who had been passing the garden's edge unseen, stopped. She had heard everything. That night, she requested Daniel's file from building security. The summary wasn't long. "Former Marine, honorable discharge after a failed mission in Mosul. No criminal record. Spotless civilian employment history." But one detail stood out. Psychological evaluation recommended but declined. She read the line 3 times. Something in her twisted. Anger, maybe. Or fear. She closed the laptop, sat in silence. What was she allowing near her daughter? What had she already allowed? The next morning, Lena refused to eat breakfast. She sat in her chair with arms folded, chin tucked. The nurse tried music, then toys, then a video. Nothing worked. Until Daniel entered the garden. And Lena stood. Not because she was told, not because she was expected to. She stood because she wanted to. Amelia watched it all from the terrace above. Her hands trembled around the railing. She didn't know whether to scream or cry, because for the first time in her life, she felt jealous of a child, and she couldn't remember the last time Lena had stood for her. The knock on Daniel's door came just before noon. He was in the basement utility room, sorting through wiring supplies when the call came in, short, clipped, and sterile. "Mr. Reese," said the voice on the other end, "your access to the building has been revoked effective immediately. You are to gather your personal items and vacate the premises within the hour. You will be compensated for the week." No explanation, no discussion, just an order. Daniel didn't argue. He'd heard that tone before, in the military, in courtrooms, and in the quiet voice of disappointment that still echoed in his own head. He collected his things in silence. Upstairs, Amelia sat behind her desk, unread files piled high. The printed report from the military archive lay open in front of her. She hadn't wanted to read it twice, but she did. Failure to engage under duress, negligence during active operation, loss of command confidence. Official words, cold words, words that didn't explain the nuance, only the result. Still, she had made her decision. "I don't care what the garden staff says," she told her assistant earlier that morning. "This is a child. My child. We don't guess with her. We don't gamble." The assistant had hesitated. "But ma'am," the girl stood for him. Amelia's stare had silenced her. Now, alone in her office, Amelia leaned back in her chair. The city lights behind her blurred into white streaks. She was exhausted, but she was in control again. That had to mean something, didn't it? Micah didn't cry when Daniel told him they had to leave. The boy simply folded his cranes with less precision. His aunt, Danielle, met them at the train station. She lived upstate and had agreed to take Micah for a while, just until things settled. She was kind, if a little scattered. But Daniel trusted her. She was family. "Don't worry," he told his son, kneeling beside him. "I'll come back for you soon." Micah looked at him, eyes quiet but unblinking. "Will she forget us?" Daniel didn't ask who she was. "I don't think so," he said. "Some things stick." Micah nodded, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, hand-folded paper crane. It was worn, edges soft, wings slightly bent. On the inside, drawn in red ink, was a tiny smile. "Give her this," he whispered. Daniel stared at it, throat tightening. "I'll try." They hugged. The train pulled away. And just like that, the boy was gone. The garden went quiet. The wooden cart sat unused beneath the tree. The paper birds stopped arriving. The wind chime on the veranda never rang again. And Lena stopped moving. It wasn't immediate. At first, the nurses thought she was just tired. She refused the cart, declined to eat, said nothing. Again. She returned to sitting still in her chair by the window, hands folded, face pale. When the new therapist tried showing her a tablet game, Lena turned her head away. When Amelia walked in with a stuffed giraffe, Lena didn't flinch. And when one of the nurses accidentally played a voicemail from Micah, just a simple recording of laughter and wings flapping in the breeze, Lena pressed her palms to her ears and screamed. Not a tantrum, not defiance. It was grief, pure, quiet grief. Amelia stood by the window that evening, arms crossed over her chest. Below, the garden was empty. The birds, real and paper, had vanished. Even the wind seemed to avoid the courtyard now. It had all changed so fast. She had thought removing the man would return things to order. But what she got instead was silence. Worse than before. The building, once pulsing with Lena's small victories, her first clap, her first push of the cart, now echoed like a mausoleum. Every footstep felt like an intrusion. Every attempt to spark joy failed before it began. Amelia had won back her control, but she had lost her daughter again. That night, she stood in Lena's room after the child had finally fallen asleep. The mobile above the crib, a leftover from before the accident, spun slowly. The wind chime by the window stayed still. Amelia stared at it. Then, impulsively, she reached up and flicked it with her fingers. It made a dull, hollow clink. Not a chime. Not a song. Just metal. She sat on the floor beside Lena's bed and pulled her knees to her chest. And for the first time in years, she let herself weep. Not silent, dignified tears, but real ones. Elsewhere, Daniel sat alone in a tiny motel off Route 7, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock that didn't quite keep time. The paper crane from Micah sat on the table in front of him. He hadn't gone back to deliver it. He hadn't been allowed. He reached for it now, turning it over in his hand. And for a moment, just a fleeting one, he wondered if he'd made the wrong decision in walking away. The email came without a subject line. It slipped through Amelia's inbox between investment reports and security briefings. So nondescript, she almost deleted it. But something in her gut paused her. The sender's name blinked. Danielle Reese. She remembered the name vaguely from the HR file. Daniel's sister, the woman who took Micah in. Amelia opened the message. There was nothing in the body, only an attached audio file titled, "For Ms. Amelia from Micah." She hesitated, then clicked play. The first few seconds were filled with ambient sounds, the hum of an old fan, distant bird song, the shuffling of fingers adjusting a recorder. Then came the voice. "Hi, this is Micah." His voice was soft, deliberate, the words chosen like he knew they mattered. "I don't know if you'll listen, but my aunt said I could try. I miss your house. I miss the birds in the garden. I miss Lena." I think she sat again. A pause, a long one. Then, "I know you sent my dad away, and maybe that's okay. I don't know what he told you. But if you're wondering, no, he's not a hero. He tells me that all the time." Another pause. This one felt heavier. "But he's the only person in my life who never left. Not when I messed up. Not when I cried. Not when I got quiet for a whole month after the foster house. He just sat beside me and waited. Sometimes that's all someone needs." The recording rustled slightly. "My dad doesn't fix people. He just stays. Maybe that's enough. Maybe Lena doesn't need someone perfect. Maybe she just needs someone who won't leave." Click. The message ended. No dramatic music. No sign-off. Just a child's voice carrying more truth than any expert report ever had. Amelia stared at the screen, breath shallow. She replayed the message. Then again. And again. She didn't notice when tears began slipping down her cheek. She hadn't cried in front of anyone in years. But here, alone in her home office, with the city pulsing outside and her world slowly cracking from the inside, she let it come. A boy's voice had undone her in under 2 minutes. She pulled up Daniel's file again, but this time she read between the lines. She called in a favor from an old friend in Defense Intelligence, and within hours, a restricted report landed in her encrypted inbox. Operation Horizon Fall. She scrolled. Near the bottom, highlighted in red, was the truth she hadn't expected. Daniel Reese had disobeyed a direct evacuation order during an ambush. He and 3 other Marines had gone off-path to search a collapsed building where they believed children were hiding. They found one, just one, alive. But they lost 2 men in the extraction. Daniel had carried the child on his back through enemy fire. He had never once defended his decision in the debrief. No excuses, no emotion, just a single statement. "I couldn't leave him behind." Amelia stared at the screen, hand trembling. She thought of Lena, of the silence, of the way Daniel had never pushed, never preached, never demanded. He had simply stayed. She stood abruptly, heart pounding. Something in her told her to go to Lena. Now. Lena's room was dim, the curtains half closed. She sat by the window in her usual chair, back straight but distant, like a statue made of porcelain and memory. Her arms were still, her legs tucked. No movement, no sound. Amelia stepped in slowly. "Hi, baby," she said gently. Lena didn't react. Amelia crouched beside her, like she had when Lena was just a toddler learning to stand. "I want to tell you something," she whispered. "About the man who fixed the wind chime." No answer. Amelia took Lena's hand into hers. It was warm but limp. "His name is Daniel," she continued. "And the boy who folded all those birds. That's Micah. They didn't come to fix you. They didn't try to make you do anything. They just showed up." She paused, swallowed hard. "I didn't know how to do that. I was too scared to try. I was so busy protecting you, I forgot how to just be with you." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, just barely, Lena's fingers twitched in Amelia's palm. A soft breath escaped her lips, and in a voice so faint Amelia almost missed it, Lena whispered 2 words. "Daniel. Micah." The world stood still. Amelia blinked fast, a sob catching in her throat. "What did you say, baby?" Lena's lips moved again, the same words, stronger this time. "Daniel. Micah." She looked at her mother, really looked, and Amelia collapsed into her daughter's arms. Not as a CEO, not as a caretaker, but as a mother. For the first time in too long. That night, Amelia didn't call her bored. didn't draft legal memos or rehearse statements. She opened her phone, scrolled to the last contact entry with Daniel's number, and hit call. It rang once, twice. Then, "Hello?" His voice was cautious. "It's Amelia," she said. Silence, then a breath. "I figured. I was wrong," she said simply. "And Lena said your name." Daniel didn't speak. She said Micah's too. More silence. Then, his voice, barely audible. "Is she okay?" "She's asking for the boy who folded paper birds." A beat. "I'll bring him," Daniel said. Amelia closed her eyes, a slow breath leaving her chest. For the first time in months, the wind chime outside her window stirred, and this time, it rang. The small house sat on the edge of a dirt road outside Catskill, hemmed in by pines and fog. It was the kind of place built for silence. No sirens, no intercoms. Only wind and the occasional whistle of a passing train. Daniel stood on the porch, sanding a worn piece of cedar for a bench he might never finish. He hadn't turned his phone back on since Amelia's call 2 nights ago. He hadn't known what to say, or whether he wanted to hear more. He hadn't told Micah anything. He couldn't. Micah was in the backyard now, skipping rocks across the pond behind the house, too quiet for a boy his age. Daniel knew that quiet, knew what it cost. When the car pulled into the gravel driveway, Daniel didn't move. He just kept sanding. Amelia stepped out, her black coat too fine for the dust in the air, her heels sinking slightly into the earth. "I thought you'd ignore me," she said. Daniel didn't look up. "You called. I didn't hang up. That's progress?" "It's something." Amelia approached slowly, folding her arms against the breeze. "I listened to the recording. I figured. She said your name, and Micah's. That made him pause, just slightly. She stood today," Amelia added, "without the cart, just on her own." Daniel stopped sanding. "She walked 3 steps, Amelia whispered. 3 steps, like she was chasing something no one else could see. He still didn't turn around. "She's waiting for you." Now he did. And the look in his eyes. It wasn't anger or pride or even grief. It was fear. Real, raw, unfiltered fear. "I can't walk back into that house and break her again," he said. "I've already failed once. I failed as a soldier, as a father. I'm only good at leaving quietly." Amelia held his gaze. "Then leave loudly," she said. "Because you don't get to fail my daughter the way you failed yourself." Daniel blinked. "You think this is about you?" she pressed, voice trembling. "You think this is about redemption? It's not. It's about a little girl who finally felt safe in someone's presence, and then had that person vanish like everyone else in her life." He opened his mouth, closed it. She stepped closer. "You can't save the world, Daniel, but you can choose not to abandon the piece of it that needs you most right now." Silence fell between them. Then, from the backyard, Micah's voice called out, "Is she okay?" Amelia turned. "She's waiting for you too," she said gently. The black SUV pulled into the Vaughn estate just before sunset. For the first time in days, the staff had gathered by the windows, unsure of what this visit meant. A few of them held back tears as Micah stepped out of the car, clutching his paper crane tin like it was treasure. Daniel followed, slower, hesitant, his boots crunching against the stone path with every step. Amelia didn't greet them at the door. She stood off to the side, letting Lena have the moment. Because Lena was there, standing on her own, barefoot on the garden path, arms slightly outstretched, as if her balance was still a negotiation. Her face lit up the moment she saw Micah. She didn't run. She couldn't. But she walked. One shaky step, then another. Her knees wobbled, her frame tilted. But she kept going, eyes locked on the boy who had once filled her world with flying things. 3 steps. Daniel froze. Lena reached Micah and placed one hand gently on his shoulder, the other on his cheek. Micah smiled, and for the first time since Daniel had held a child in his arms amidst falling concrete in Iraq, he felt the impossible happen again. He felt peace. They sat in the garden that night, Daniel beside Amelia. Lena curled up on a blanket with Micah, who showed her how to fold a crane from a leaf. The air was crisp. The wind chime rang again, softly but clearly. "You were right," Daniel said after a while. Amelia didn't answer. "She doesn't need a savior," he continued. "She just needs someone who doesn't flinch." "She needs you," Amelia replied. Daniel looked at her. "Do you?" Amelia's gaze didn't waver. "I need someone who stays." Another silence passed, but this one felt warm, alive. Daniel glanced at Micah and Lena, heads pressed together, whispering like conspirators. "I don't know what I'm doing most days," he said. "None of us do," she replied. He smiled. Then, without another word, Daniel reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded paper crane. On its wing, written in Micah's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words: "Please let him stay." The morning mist had not yet lifted when Lena wandered into the sunroom, trailing the hem of her pajama pants behind her like a cloud. Her blonde curls were wild, a halo of light against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Micah was already there, cross-legged on the rug, building towers of folded cranes into impossible structures. Daniel was setting mugs on the table. Not coffee. Amelia had insisted Lena never smell bitterness this early in the day, but warm chamomile with honey. One for her, one for Micah, one, now, for himself. He still didn't quite know how he'd ended up here, not as a technician, not as a guest, but as something permanent. He watched Lena settle beside Micah, the way she naturally leaned against him like she'd been doing it her whole life. Her fingers found the paper wings without hesitation now. No more trembling, no more fear, just memory in motion. Amelia stood at the entryway, watching all 3 from the shadows. She had started making a habit of this, not leading, not commanding, just observing. She had realized some time ago that healing didn't need a CEO. It needed presence. And maybe, finally, she was learning how to offer that too. Later that afternoon, the children played outside while Daniel repaired the latch on the greenhouse door. He hummed something under his breath, an old folk tune his mother used to sing before things got complicated. Lena ran in clumsy circles around the garden path, Micah chasing behind her with exaggerated slowness, letting her win each time. She stopped abruptly, cheeks flushed pink, breath catching in short, excited bursts. Daniel looked up from his work and smiled. And that's when she said it. A whisper, barely louder than the breeze. "Daddy." Daniel froze. So did Micah. So did Amelia, standing just behind the veranda door. Lena turned toward Daniel, arms wide, giggling. "Daddy." It hit like a shockwave. Not the word itself, but who it came from. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He stared at her, stunned, unable to speak. He had dreamed of that word, waited for it, hoped, quietly, that someday maybe Micah would say it. But Micah never had. Not once. Daniel had never asked for it, never pushed. He understood why. The system had pulled them apart too many times, taught the boy that love was conditional and presence was temporary. So when the word finally came, it came from someone else. A child not born of his blood, but born of his presence, and it undid him. Lena skipped toward him, clutched his leg like it was home, and looked up with those wide, fearless eyes. "Daddy, look. I can stand all by myself." Daniel knelt slowly, his voice uneven. "You can. You really can." She beamed. Behind her, Amelia stepped out into the light. Her heart was breaking and healing all at once. It would have been easy to feel replaced, to feel erased. But she didn't. Because what she saw in Daniel's eyes wasn't pride. It was shock. And something deeper. Something like gratitude. Amelia sat beside him on the stone bench while Lena darted off toward the cart. Daniel didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he exhaled. "I thought it would come from Micah," he said softly. That word. Amelia's voice was gentle. "Maybe it still will." He shook his head, a quiet smile tugging at the edge of his lips. "Maybe. Or maybe this is the universe's way of saying family isn't just about biology." She looked at him. It never was. Daniel picked at the frayed edge of his sleeve. "I always thought I wasn't built for this, for staying, for being someone's home." But then she said it, and it didn't feel stolen. It felt right. "She wasn't giving you a title," Amelia said. "She was giving you a truth." That evening, Daniel found Micah on the upstairs balcony, staring out at the city lights. The boy had been unusually quiet since Lena's moment in the garden. Daniel sat beside him, not saying anything for a while. Then, softly, "You heard her, didn't you?" Micah nodded. Daniel waited. Then, "Did that bother you?" Micah shook his head slowly. "No," he said at last. "I liked it." Daniel turned. "You did?" Micah picked at the hem of his shirt. "Because now, she has one." Daniel blinked. Micah looked up at him. "I always knew you were mine," he said. "I just didn't know if you knew." Daniel swallowed hard, blinking away the sudden sting in his eyes. "I knew, buddy. I've always known." Micah smiled, and for the first time, Daniel felt the truth settle inside him, not as weight, but as belonging. He didn't need to be chosen by blood. He'd been chosen by presence, by time, by trust. Later that night, as the house grew quiet and the moonlight pooled across the wooden floor, Daniel stepped into Lena's room. She was already asleep, curled up with one of Micah's paper birds cradled against her chest. He bent down, brushed a strand of hair from her face. She stirred. "Daddy?" A whisper. Half dream. Daniel's hand trembled on her blanket. "I'm here," he said. And he meant it. The wind was warm that evening, carrying the scent of lavender and slow-cooked tomatoes across the terrace. It rustled the hedges gently, caught in the folds of the linen tablecloth, and made the wind chime over the glass doors whisper a quiet, familiar tune. Daniel stood on the edge of the patio, hands in the pockets of his faded jacket, watching Lena and Micah giggle as they set mismatched napkins around the small, round table. It was a modest spread: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a salad that Amelia had insisted on tossing herself. No staff, no chefs, no clinical silence. Just 3 people and the first real meal they had ever shared together. He hadn't said yes yet. Not officially. Not to the unspoken invitation that had begun forming since the moment Lena called him Daddy. But he was here, and that meant something. Amelia stepped outside with a pitcher of lemonade, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her usually styled hair loose for the first time since Daniel had met her. She looked human, grounded. "You're really making us eat outside?" Daniel asked, half a smile forming. Amelia shrugged. "I was told by our youngest party planner that picnics make everything taste better." She nodded toward Lena, who was now trying to wrap a napkin around a fork like it was a burrito. Daniel watched for a moment longer. Then he turned to Amelia. "I need to be clear about something before this dinner turns into a celebration," he said. Amelia arched a brow. "All right." "I'm not staying here as staff," he said. "I'm not a caretaker. I'm not a hired hand. And I'm definitely not a stand-in." Her jaw tightened slightly. "I never asked you to be." "I'm not looking for a job," he continued. "I'm looking for a place I can keep a promise." She crossed her arms. "To who?" "To her," he nodded toward Lena. "And to my son. And maybe Finally, to myself. There was a long pause, the kind where something unspoken is tested in the space between two people. Then Amelia said quietly, "I don't need a nanny, Daniel." She stepped closer, her voice steady. "I need someone who knows how to listen to her when she's not speaking. Someone who doesn't flinch when she falls or push when she hesitates. Someone who shows up, again and again, without needing a title or a reason." Daniel looked at her. "I need the man who taught her that stillness isn't the same as silence," Amelia added. His breath caught. "I don't need you to be anyone you're not," she said. "I just need you to stay." The wind stirred again, and the wind chime answered. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he nodded. Once. "I stay," he said. They sat around the table as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across their plates. Lena requested ketchup for her mashed potatoes. Micah passed her the bottle like it was a sacred artifact. Amelia laughed when Daniel accidentally knocked over the salt. And Daniel, who hadn't eaten a meal with a family in over a decade, realized his hands had stopped shaking. It wasn't perfect. The potatoes were lumpy. The bread was over-toasted. Lena spilled water on her lap and Micah dropped his fork twice. But no one yelled. No one got up and left. No one disappeared. After the meal, they cleared the dishes together. Amelia dried. Daniel washed. Micah and Lena stacked the plates, whispering about who would get the last piece of pie tomorrow. They didn't talk about therapy. They didn't talk about pasts. They just were. Later, as the stars blinked awake in the sky, Daniel stood by the wind chime and looked out at the garden. Amelia joined him, cradling a mug of tea. "You fixed it again," she said, nodding to the wind chime. "I just tightened the strings." "It only plays when you're here," she said softly. He didn't answer. Just let the chime speak for him. Amelia sipped her tea. "I spent a long time thinking I had to build the perfect world for Lena, that if I kept everything in control, she'd eventually feel safe enough to return to me." "She never left," Daniel said. "She just got tired of waiting." Amelia looked at him, surprised. "She was always listening," he continued, "even when she couldn't move, even when she wouldn't speak. Kids don't stop loving. They just stop showing it when they think no one notices." Amelia looked down into her cup. "I notice now," she said. Daniel gave a quiet nod. That's all she ever needed. She glanced up at him again, and this time there was something softer in her gaze. Something not just maternal, not just grateful, but open, tentative. He didn't press. He didn't need to. They both understood something important now. This wasn't a rescue story. It was a choosing story. And they had all chosen to stay. The leaves in Central Park had just begun their slow transformation, fading into hues of amber and rust, as if the trees themselves were exhaling the weight of the past year. A soft wind stirred, playful and warm. It carried with it the scent of cinnamon from nearby carts, the distant laughter of joggers, and the unmistakable chime of something small, something fragile, yet somehow still intact. Lena Vaughn ran, not walked, across the grass. She ran. Her tiny legs weren't fast, and she sometimes stumbled, but each step was her own, and each time she fell, she laughed, the kind of laugh that echoed, that healed. Her blonde hair bounced behind her, a ribbon trailing in the wind. Micah sat cross-legged nearby, an oversized book in his lap. He wasn't reading it so much as explaining it, out loud, as if Lena's teddy bear 5 feet away needed the context of every chapter. Daniel crouched beneath the old iron swing set, tightening bolts on one of the chains with a wrench that had seen more wars than parks. His hands, the same hands that once trembled before a trigger, moved with patience now. Precision. Peace. Behind him, On a checkered blanket laid out beneath a maple tree, Amelia poured 2 cups of tea. One for her, one for the man who'd never asked to stay, but chose to. The wind blew gently, and somewhere above the garden patio of their brownstone, the home they now shared, not by title, but by truth, the wind chime sang its quiet song. It was no longer bright and new. Its strings were mended, its wooden top faded by sun. But it held firm. Its song was deeper now, warmer, and it rang true. Amelia sat beside Daniel on the bench, watching the children from a distance. She passed him the tea without a word. He accepted it, fingers brushing hers. Lena called out something incomprehensible mid-run, something only a 7-year-old could invent. Micah responded with a dramatic groan, then chased her in mock surrender. Daniel smiled. "She still calls you Daddy," Amelia said softly. He looked at her. "Does that bother you?" She shook her head. "No. I think it saved her." A long silence stretched between them. Not awkward, not heavy, just full, like silence between people who no longer needed to fill the space. Then she added, "And it saved me too." Daniel looked out at the grass again. Funny how things heal when you stop trying to fix them. Amelia laughed under her breath. Says the man who rebuilt a swing with military precision. He smirked. Okay, some things are still worth fixing. They both turned when they heard Lena shriek, not in fear, but joy, as Micah tackled her into a pile of leaves. For a second, it looked like chaos, then like childhood, then like home. Amelia's voice was quieter when she said it, like she wasn't sure she meant for him to hear. "That wind chime," she murmured. "It's not that it never broke." Daniel turned to her. "It's that, thanks to you, it never had to break again." His breath caught, but he didn't respond. He just looked at her, eyes full, nodding once. Not as a soldier, not as a janitor, not even as a father. Just as a man. A man who had chosen to stay. That night, as they tucked the children into their beds, Lena in her pink pajamas, Micah with his stack of bedtime books, Daniel stood by the window. The moonlight poured in, catching the edge of the wind chime hanging just outside. It swayed gently, casting a soft, rounded shadow on the wooden floor. Its soft notes danced through the room like a whisper. Amelia stepped beside him, arms folded across her chest. "Do you ever think about leaving again?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "Every morning, for about 5 seconds." She turned to look at him, brow furrowed. "That's how long it takes me to remember where I am," he continued. "Who I am now. Not what I've done, but what I've chosen." "And what have you chosen?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her, eyes steady. "To never walk away again." Amelia smiled, a slow one, the kind that said she believed him, not because he promised, but because he hadn't. Because every day since his return, he had simply stayed. Not as a savior, not as a solution, but as presence, as steadiness, as home. The next morning, as the first light crept into the kitchen, Lena padded in barefoot and wordlessly reached for a mug. Daniel lifted her gently onto the counter so she could help stir the oatmeal. Micah wandered in 5 minutes later, still half asleep, and wrapped his arms around his father's waist. Amelia entered last, still tying her robe. And for a moment, a brief, shimmering moment, none of them spoke. Because they didn't need to. Because this was the kind of silence that didn't need breaking. Just like the wind chime, gently tapping against the glass outside. Never quite still, never quite loud, but always, always there. And in that space, quiet, flawed, but real, something whole lived. Not perfect, but permanent. Because family isn't the place that never breaks. It's the place someone chooses not to leave. And somewhere deep in the breeze, the wind chime rang again. And this time, it rang like a promise. Where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to know. Share your country or state in the comments below. It means a lot to us to see how far these stories travel and whose hearts they touch. If this story moved you, even just a little, consider subscribing. Not for numbers, but so we can keep telling stories that remind us all. Kindness still matters. Thank you for spending your time with us. From our hearts to yours, may you always find strength in softness and beauty in broken things that choose not to stay broken.